No chance, so that's what you got. Up against a machine too strong. Pretty politicians buying souls for run song. Puppets, come and get it. Won't find their place in line. But I am straight around your finger now, boy, 'cause it's just a matter of time. 'Cause you got no chance in hell.
Remember that time God himself showed up for a tag team match in WWE? Yeah, that was crazy, wasn't it? Showing that there were absolutely no limits in terms of how far he could push the envelope, Vince McMahon promoted a match where he and his son Shane would take on Shawn Michaels, an outspoken born-again Christian, and God, as in the God, creator of everything. The tag team match at Backlash 2006 gets talked about a lot, and for good reason too. It also gets used as an example for how McMahon and the WWE at one time couldn't have cared less when walking that fine line between satire and being outright offensive. But it's one of those polarizing wrestling storylines where some fans will ridicule the WWE for being so silly, some fans will laugh at it and take it as nothing more than a wacky wrestling angle, and some people were actually offended by the match, or at least they say they were online. I am going to cover the tag team match very soon on the channel, but today I want to cover the beginning of the McMahon vs Michaels rivalry, because there were some really good things going on before God was even mentioned on WWE TV. HBK vs McMahon at WrestleMania exceeded expectations, and the story leading up to the Mania match was a classic abusive power situation that was actually done right. So today we're going to cover the build up to WrestleMania 22 and the match itself, and in a video getting released on the channel soon, we'll cover the Backlash 2006 match. The fabled tag team match pitting HBK and God versus Vince McMahon and Shane McMahon took place in April 2006 at the Backlash pay-per-view, but our story goes all the way back to Survivor Series 1997 in the Montreal Screwjob. Imagine that. Vince McMahon screwed Bret Hart during the Hitman's WWF title defense against Shawn Michaels, and almost a decade later, the Mr. McMahon character still thought screwing Bret was a thing of beauty. Bret Hart agreed to put together a WWE-produced DVD documentary, and the relationship between Bret and McMahon was, in real life, improving. But on TV, Mr. McMahon wanted to gloat a little about what he did back at Survivor Series 1997. On the December 26, 2005 episode of Raw, Vince McMahon was going to watch Bret Hart's documentary, and at the very end of the show, McMahon was going to give his thoughts on the DVD. McMahon watched the DVD backstage, he got right to the point where he screwed Bret, and Vince then made his way down to the ring. Vince says he done the right thing at Survivor Series. McMahon tricked Bret Hart into getting the result Vince wanted, and that's all that matters. Shawn Michaels comes to the ring, and Vince wants Shawn to tell the fans about how they both screwed Bret and how they cashed in those big checks after Montreal, while Bret went down the toilet along with World Championship Wrestling, and Shawn isn't gonna play ball. Shawn says he'd screw Bret again if he had to because he's loyal to the company. He was loyal in 1997 and he's loyal in 2005. But here's the problem. Bret Hart can live in that day all he wants, and that's his decision. But it's time for Vince to stop living in that day, and it's time to let it go. Times have changed, and it's maybe time for McMahon to grow up a bit and move on. Vince lists off the champions of the past, all champions of the past who moved on while Vince remained as a constant, and McMahon wonders if it's time for Shawn to move on. Shawn needs to think about this. HBK has a family and responsibilities. Shawn maybe doesn't want Vince to make a move on because there's no other place for Shawn to go. McMahon says he doesn't like throwing his weight around, but he's making Shawn swallow his pride because Shawn's just like all these people in attendance. He works for someone and he's gonna do what he's told. McMahon ends his speech by saying he screwed Bret Hart, and if he has to, Vince will screw Shawn too. HBK removes his jacket, but Vince leaves the ring and Raw goes off the air. Vince wasted absolutely no time in making Shawn's life difficult. On the first Raw of 2006, McMahon booked a match, Shawn Michaels vs Kane, and if HBK used the super kick, then HBK would get disqualified. Shawn said to hell with it and he warmed up the band anyway, but Vince warned him that Michaels would lose his spot in the Elimination Chamber later in the week if he performed Sweet Chin Music. This mid-match announcement led to Michaels getting chokeslammed and Shawn lost his first match of the year. It didn't end there though. During the commercial break following the match, Shawn learned that he was the #1 entrant in the New Year's Revolution Elimination Chamber match. HBK went into the pay-per-view later in the week and he was defeated inside the chamber. So he headed back to Raw thinking his punishment was served and he could maybe get on with things without Vince McMahon breathing down his neck. Of course, McMahon wasn't through yet. The next night on Raw, Vince forced Shawn to tag up with Kurt Angle, his opponent from WrestleMania 21, and instantly there were some trust issues between the Heartbreak Kid and the Olympic gold medalist. During the match, Shawn and Kurt argued when things didn't go their way, and eventually Angle flat out refused to tag in, so Shawn hit Angle with a super kick before leaving the match with a smile on his face. Mr. McMahon wasn't amused, so Vince booked a Michaels vs Angle match for the following week's episode of Raw. Before that match could take place, Kurt Angle won the World Heavyweight title over on SmackDown after winning a Battle Royal. Vince decided that the Angle vs Michaels match would not be for the world title, but if Shawn lost the match, then Shawn's contract would get terminated and HBK would be no more. The match Shawn and Kurt had on Raw was fantastic. Anytime these two wrestled each other, it was always good, and this one kinda falls under the radar, so check it out. Angle got the ankle lock locked in, and Daivari, Angle's manager at the time, got a little too close to the action and HBK was able to slap him across the face. Enraged, Daivari jumped in the ring with a steel chair and the referee tried to take it away. Angle released the ankle lock and Daivari hits Kurt Angle with the chair by accident, resulting in Angle losing the match and Shawn keeping his job. Kurt was so pissed off that he ended up dumping Daivari out of the ring with an Olympic slam. On the 23rd of January episode of Raw, Shawn Michaels was scheduled to take on Shelton Benjamin. McMahon came out before the bell and he gave Shawn some bad news. If HBK can't beat Shelton Benjamin tonight, then HBK will not take part in the Royal Rumble match later in the week. Shelton's mama tried to distract Michaels, but the plan backfired. Shawn beat Shelton and he celebrated a job well done afterwards. But of course, McMahon wasn't through yet. Vince came into Shawn's locker room and HBK told Vince to forget about moving on. If it's that difficult for Vince to let go of the past and forget about Montreal, then Vince should just do what makes him happy. All McMahon has to do is leave Shawn out of it. One of Vince's New Year's resolutions was to make himself more happy, and Vince has an idea. Vince says he has more money than everyone in the arena combined. He has more money than God himself. But Vince wants to turn back the clock. McMahon says he wants to turn the business back decades and he wants to bring sex, drugs and rock and roll back to wrestling. Vince wants Shawn to remember all the late night parties during the 80s and 90s and how much fun HBK had. Vince says he himself is getting ready to do it all again and Vince wants Shawn to join him. McMahon thinks Shawn has played the role of faithful and loyal husband long enough and it's time to go back to pure debauchery because Vince knows, at his core, Shawn Michaels is a degenerate. McMahon wonders what happened to the, quote, pill-popping, brash son of a bitch Shawn Michaels because that's the guy who can join Vince in going back to where they belong. Michaels flat out refuses. He says he'd never go back to the old HBK, so Vince leaves before telling Shawn that his luck runs out this week at the Royal Rumble. Vince guarantees it. Great promo from Vince here, by the way. It maybe hasn't aged well considering the recent news that broke out and all that stuff, but still, Vince's delivery was very, very good. So, we get to the Royal Rumble match in 2006. Shawn draws a good number, coming out at number 25, but Vince eventually came out to cause a distraction. Shawn didn't realise that Shane McMahon was standing right behind him, and Shawn got eliminated by Vince's son. Shawn got back in the ring to try to get a little revenge, but he was stopped by Triple H. Hunter tried to pedigree Michaels, but Shawn countered with sweet chin music. But all this didn't matter, Shane was able to escape and head back up the ramp. Michaels had the chance to go after Vince, but Vince put all the heat on his own son, and Shawn decided to go after Shane while the Royal Rumble match continued on. Before we continue on, I think it's important to appreciate how truly petty Vince McMahon was being during all this and how the storyline was built on someone just telling Vince to move on. Here's a grown man living in the past and finding enjoyment out of something that happened a long time ago, and when someone gives him sound advice, he completely flies off the handle and starts throwing his weight around while acting like a spoiled child, even threatening to completely take his whole company back decades so he could live in that same past. The foundation for this storyline, I feel, gets overlooked. It's not the typical employee versus boss storyline that Vince would take part in. It was more rooted in McMahon's wishes to bring his company and himself back to a world of decadence, while Shawn Michaels, the born-again Christian, wanted to move forward and forget the old days. Anyway, people guessed that Shawn vs Shane would take place at WrestleMania, but that didn't happen. Vince McMahon himself would wrestle on the grandest stage of all, so let's see how it all went down. The night after the Rumble, HBK interrupted an in-ring Vince McMahon promo, and Shawn said he wanted to kick Vince's teeth down his throat, but he knows McMahon would fire him. If Shawn leaves the company, he knows McMahon would sue him for breach of contract. Shawn could turn back the clock and be the old HBK that Vince wants so badly, but that's not going to happen either. So really, Shawn has no options. Vince says Shawn's screwed. He's screwed worse than Bret Hart ever was, but Vince isn't going to fire Michaels right now. That wouldn't make good business sense. Shawn says Vince is right, it wouldn't make good business sense, and what's good for business is Shawn and Vince settling this the old-fashioned way with a match inside the ring. Vince, for the first time in this rivalry, looks worried. Shawn can't believe McMahon's unsure about a potential match. The man who took on the government, the man who walks around with giant grapefruits, is afraid of little old HBK. McMahon says there's no chance in hell that a match is going to take place, but he will give Shawn a chance to commit career suicide. Vince gives Shawn a free shot. He challenges Shawn to hit him right on the face. He gets on his knees and he begs for Shawn to strike him, but then Shane McMahon shows up and Shawn gets taken out with a steel chair. Vince is a little shaken up, so he puts on his jacket, he gets out of the ring, and he and Shane leave the arena while Shawn's laid out on the mat. The next week, a Road to WrestleMania tournament was announced on Raw. 8 men would take part in this tournament, with the winner getting a shot at the WWE Championship at WrestleMania 22. HBK's first round opponent was The Big Show, and once again, Vince McMahon came out to cause problems. McMahon informed Michaels that HBK can resign and leave the company for good. Shawn doesn't have to worry about Vince suing him because McMahon will sign documents that will prevent him from doing so. So Shawn Michaels can do what he said he was going to do last week and leave without any worries of repercussions. McMahon says there's going to be a mandatory retirement party for Michaels on the following episode of Raw, and seeing as Michaels is now set to leave the company, there's no point in Shawn taking part in this WrestleMania tournament. HBK gets replaced by Shelton Benjamin, and Shawn Michaels is pissed off. So, the next week on Raw, Vince gets a few lawyers and we're going to see Shawn sign his resignation letter in the middle of the ring. HBK doesn't look too eager. Vince teases a career highlight video and a handshake from every WWE superstar in the locker room, but Vince thought the Spirit Squad's tribute to HBK would be way more fitting. Shawn begins speaking, saying he doesn't want to retire, but Vince cuts off HBK's microphone. McMahon wants Shawn to sign those papers and move on with it. HBK takes a seat, he grabs a pen, the crowd chant HBK, and Shawn decides he's not gonna resign. McMahon gets irate, Shawn grabs the mic out of Vince's hand, and Shawn says he can't do it. He knows what he said last week, and he knows that he said that walking away was an option, but really, it's not. Shawn loves his job. To walk away from the ring and to walk away from the fans would be walking away from one of the greatest joys HBK knows, and Shawn simply won't do it. McMahon takes the microphone back, and Vince says he's doing all this for a reason. And this bit, ladies and gentlemen, is one of the most overlooked things about this entire storyline, and it explains why Vince has been so petty since December 26th, 2005. Shawn has something Vince can't buy, something that Vince wants desperately. Mr. McMahon wants inner peace. Vince says nobody knows what it's like being Vince McMahon. Vince doesn't even know who he is anymore. He has an empire to oversee, stockholders, sponsors, employees. McMahon is under an extreme amount of pressure and his life is an absolute nightmare. McMahon thinks that Shawn disappearing will fix everything because Shawn is someone who possesses something that McMahon can't have. Shawn needs to get away and he needs to stay away for good. So this whole time McMahon's been jealous. There's something he wants that money can't buy, and that's why he's been acting like a spoiled brat and throwing his weight around. Michaels rips up the contract, McMahon slaps Shawn across the face, and before Raw moves on, McMahon says that Shawn just opened the gates to his own personal hell by ripping up those resignation papers. So, how could Vince make Shawn's life any worse? For nearly 2 months, Vince has been going out of his way to make HBK miserable, and now he's promised to make Shawn's life a living hell. It started with a handicap match. Shawn had to take on 4 members of the Spirit Squad on the 20th of February episode of Raw. Vince thought 5-on-1 was a bit overkill. Michaels had the match won. He nailed Mikey with sweet chin music, but the rest of the squad jumped Michaels and the referee had no choice but to call for the bell. The Spirit Squad then done a number on the Heartbreak Kid, but help came from a very unexpected individual, Marty Jannetty. The Rockers fought off the Spirit Squad and both Shawn and Marty looked very happy to see each other, but Vince got an idea when he saw Marty Jannetty back inside a WWE Raw ring. Vince explained that Marty had fallen on some hard times and he needs a job. So Vince says he'll present Marty with a contract next week on Raw and Marty can begin working with the WWE immediately after signing on the dotted line. There's just one small caveat. Marty has to join the elite Mr. McMahon Kiss My Ass Club before signing his new contract. On the following episode of Raw then, Marty couldn't do it. He wanted to know if there was another way to get his contract without kissing McMahon's ass, so Vince had Marty try the Master Lock Challenge. If Jannetty could break Chris Masters' Master Lock, then Marty would get a job. Marty was brought down to his knees, but he began to get back up, and just when it looked like he was about to break the hold, McMahon kicked him. Vince was just about to force Jannetty to pucker up, but HBK ran down to the ring for the save. McMahon thought this was going to happen though, so he got a little backup of his own. Shane McMahon shows up, and HBK gets taken out with a hard chair shot, knocking him out cold. Not satisfied with Michaels getting wiped out, Vince forces Shawn to join the Mr. McMahon Kiss My Ass Club, and McMahon announces 2 matches. Shane vs Shawn on Saturday night's main event in 2 weeks' time, and Vince vs Shawn at WrestleMania 22. The following week, Vince bragged about what he did to Michaels and he revealed the cover of Muscle and Fitness magazine, a cover that Mr. McMahon himself graced. But Vince sent the security team away a little too early and Michaels was able to launch an attack. Enraged by what happened, Vince wanted the Shane vs Shawn match to also take place on Raw, so HBK vs the Prodigal Son happened twice in the space of a few weeks. Before the match, a pregnant Stephanie McMahon came to Shawn to apologise for her family's actions, but she got some pains and she asked Shawn to go get her some water. Stephanie then grabbed Shawn's water while he was out of sight and she spiked it. Shawn came back, Stephanie left, Shawn drank the whole bottle of water and he made his way down to the ring. Not only did Shawn have to put up with Vince interfering in the match, but he started feeling off and he struggled to defend himself. He couldn't pull off his usual moves, and whatever Stephanie put in Shawn's drink affected HBK's performance so much that Shane was able to pin Shawn after a hard right hand. If that wasn't enough, Shane got Lillian Garcia to announce another match that was going to take place right after this one, Vince McMahon vs Shawn Michaels. Vince quickly covered Shawn and Vince got a pinfall win, so it's in the record books that Vince McMahon did indeed beat Shawn Michaels on Monday Night Raw. On the 13th of March episode of Raw, Vince said that after his matches last week, Shawn was slurring his words backstage, he couldn't stand up, he was completely out of it, so Vince came to the conclusion that HBK was on some illegal substances. Only in the WWE would you get a public urine test, and that's exactly what happened on Raw. Shawn comes to the ring and Shane calls HBK a junkie. Shawn's forced to take the test while under the supervision of a doctor, but this whole thing backfired when Shawn said it's better to be pissed off than to be pissed on, and he threw the cup all over Vince and Shane. You know, this is what people remember from this whole build-up, and it is amusing for sure, but with the water bottle stuff from last week and this stuff right here, we have went straight to the usual WWE nonsense. I thought the stuff with Vince wanting what Shawn had and the whole thing about Vince not knowing who he really was some really good work, and the storyline should have been built around that a little more. Now it seems like we're in familiar territory just before Saturday night's main event in WrestleMania. But anyway, McMahon got a little revenge by making Shawn once again face the Spirit Squad, this time inside a steel cage, and Shane McMahon joined in on the action to make sure HBK got completely destroyed. After the Spirit Squad won the match, Shane went coast to coast. Next up then is Saturday night's main event, and the match Shawn and Shane had was a whole lot of fun. I'll maybe cover this in the future in more detail, but the street fight these two had was really good, filled with plenty of weapons, big bumps, and of course Vince McMahon getting himself involved. Shawn dodged the coast to coast and Vince took all the impact. Michaels then hit the elbow drop and sweet chin music, but Vince woke up and he pulled the referee out of the ring. A low blow from Shane put HBK on the mat, and Shane then locked in the sharpshooter. In a reenactment of Survivor Series 1997, Vince ordered the timekeeper to ring the bell and Shane won the match. HBK didn't give up, but Shane goes down in the history books as the winner after a very entertaining matchup. John Cena and Triple H would then get involved in the storyline. Those two were main eventing WrestleMania that year. These two got involved when the McMahons celebrated Shane's big win on Saturday night's main event on Monday Night Raw, and McMahon made two announcements. Firstly, the WrestleMania Vince vs HBK match would be a no-holds-barred match. And secondly, Shawn had to face Triple H in a one-on-one bout that night on Raw. John Cena interrupted the McMahons. Cena wanted to get his hands on Triple H before WrestleMania, and seeing as Shane was feeling a little frisky on this evening, Vince decided to change HBK's match. Cena would now team up with Shawn Michaels to take on Triple H and Shane O'Mac. Shane didn't seem too happy with this announcement. McMahon was at ringside for the tag match and it all went to hell as soon as Shawn Michaels hit the ring. Shawn was held back by security when he made a run for Shane, and because Cena hit Shane with a closed fist, McMahon disqualified Cena. Vince ordered Cena to leave or he'd lose the WWE title and the chance to headline WrestleMania against Triple H, and the match was restarted as a 2-on-1 handicap match. HBK had no chance. Every time he got the upper hand, the numbers game would come into play, and McMahon watched on as his WrestleMania opponent got annihilated. In the end, Cena came back out to help Michaels, and the babyfaces ended up beating the hell out of Vince's security, so Vince decided to book a big match for the Raw before WrestleMania. John Cena would face Vince McMahon himself in the Raw main event. Raw opened up with Vince announcing that the HBK vs Triple H match that was originally scheduled for the week prior would also take place, and during that match, McMahon predictably made things difficult for Shawn. HBK was about to get wiped out with a sledgehammer shot, but Cena ran in for the save. During the Cena vs McMahon match, Vince wanted Shawn and Triple H handcuffed to the ropes. He wanted a clean one-on-one fight with Cena. But of course he didn't really, because he provided Triple H with a handcuff key while HBK stayed put. Triple H took out Cena with a sledgehammer shot, HBK took one too on the outside, and then McMahon hit Shawn with an admittedly weak looking chair shot, but don't worry, nothing would look weak at all on Sunday. Shawn would finally get his hands on Vince at WrestleMania. All he had to do was wait for 6 days. This part of our story ends at WrestleMania. McMahon had put Shawn on his own personal highway to hell, and in the Allstate Arena with millions watching around the world, HBK had the chance to fight his boss and get some payback. The build-up had been pretty one-sided, but now it was time for the no-holds-barred match to take place, and like all of McMahon's matches, Vince had told his opponent beforehand to not hold back and lay it in as much as possible. Because McMahon didn't have enough in-ring experience, he would try to get around this by taking stiff shots, and this match was absolutely no exception. Vince McMahon takes a beating at WrestleMania 22. HBK comes to the ring first and he watches as Vince poses in front of his Muscle and Fitness magazine cover. Michaels doesn't want to wait, so he rushes out of the ring and the fight's on. Vince takes a few chops before getting thrown into Jim Ross and the King. Shawn punches and chokes McMahon on the announce table. Vince gets hit on the head with a microphone, and Shawn then grabs the Muscle and Fitness cover as McMahon gets in the ring. When the framed picture gets broken over Vince's head, Jim Ross tells Shawn to shove it up Vince's ass also. HBK slaps McMahon across the ear, he mocks McMahon's cover pose, and then the Spirit Squad show up. We all should have known that this wouldn't be a fair fight. Shawn slams on the mat hard after the squad throw him high into the air, but Michaels dodges a leg drop from Kenny Dykstra, and the entire Spirit Squad gets taken out by HBK. Shawn uses the squad's megaphone to wipe out the cheerleaders, and he launches Dykstra over the top rope and into the other 4 members. All this though gives McMahon an opportunity to regroup, and HBK goes down after a hard clothesline. Shawn gets choked in the corner before McMahon takes off his belt. Michaels gets his back whipped before the belt gets wrapped around HBK's neck. Shawn does try to fight back, but Vince puts him right back down, and it looks like McMahon's happy with how things are going right now. Vince then begins mocking Bret Hart. Bret was inducted into the Hall of Fame the night before Mania, but he opted not to attend the pay-per-view on Sunday. The crowd were chanting for Bret from the beginning of the match, so in typical Vince McMahon fashion, he was gonna rub it in a little and get a little heat. McMahon then warms up the band, but Michaels grabs his foot. Vince goes down after a flying forearm, and it's then Vince's turn to get whipped. Michaels lays it in way more than what Vince does here, and it sounds really painful. Shawn then goes to end it. We see the elbow drop. Michaels warms up the band, but Shane McMahon shows up and Shawn gets hit with a kendo stick. Again, we should have seen this coming. Shane has a pair of handcuffs and Vince gets an idea. HBK can join the Kiss My Ass Club again, and he can join it at WrestleMania. So Vince gets in position, but Shawn quickly throws Shane's head into his dad's asshole. So Shane joins the club, Vince takes a low blow, and Shawn decides to handcuff Shane to the ropes in a little callback to what happened to HBK on Raw. Shawn performs the Shane McMahon taunt before beating the crap out of Shane with the kendo stick, absolutely no mercy, and Shawn then grabs a chair. Commentators like to embellish things a little when they say some chair shots sound like a gun getting fired. This one actually did. It gets even better though. Michaels decides not to hit Sweet Chin Music and end the match. He goes to the outside where he grabs a ladder, and McMahon takes the corner of the ladder right on the head. Nothing fancy about it, just a hard shot that causes blood to pool around Vince's head while he's laid out on the mat. A few fans at ringside have been giving Shawn a hard time since the opening bell, and he's been feeding off the negativity it seems. He's fired up tonight for sure. Shawn goes back to the outside and he throws a few trash cans into the ring along with a table. Vince gets whacked with a can and Shawn puts McMahon on the table. He climbs the ladder, but then he has second thoughts. The crowd boos Shawn as he climbs back down the ladder, but they pop when HBK goes to the outside and he pulls out the biggest ladder I think I've ever seen in a wrestling match. A WrestleMania sized ladder. Credit to Shane McMahon here too. His reaction to seeing this giant monstrosity was fantastic. Shawn softens McMahon up a little and he places the trash can on his boss. Vince gets put on the table. Shawn has a smile on his face before he climbs up. HBK gets to the top. The crowd pops when Shawn goes back to 1997 like Vince wanted him to, with a little DX crotch chop action. And Michaels jumps off the ladder, hitting Vince with an elbow drop. Triple H would also do the crotch chop a little later on in the main event. HBK and Triple H were teasing a DX return here at WrestleMania. Anyway, Shawn stops the medics from helping Vince because Shawn has one more thing left to do. He yells at Vince that he's going to kick his teeth down his throat, and then we see a full contact super kick. Absolutely ridiculous. Shawn Michaels wins via pinfall. The crowd goes nuts. Vince McMahon gets brought to the back in a stretcher, but he's as defiant as ever as he leaves the arena. HBK tells those fans in the front row to suck it before celebrating, and what a fun and chaotic match that was at WrestleMania 22. This storyline, I thought, started off really well, and while it did dip a little towards the end, it was still a good build for a WrestleMania attraction match, and I'd also say the whole thing gets overlooked. People will remember the in-ring testing of Shawn Michaels, and people will remember the elbow drop from the top of the ladder, but there were quite a few other good to great moments in this rivalry that don't get brought up too often. I think the feud gets overshadowed. The Steve Austin and Vince McMahon rivalry is absolutely legendary, and that's what most people will instantly think of when remembering McMahon as an on-screen talent. And all this work that Michaels and McMahon went through to get to WrestleMania also gets overshadowed by the Backlash tag team match. Things go in a complete different direction when the feud continues on and Michaels' faith gets used to further the angle, and that's what we'll cover in the next part of this two-part video. Vince McMahon and Shane McMahon versus Shawn Michaels, and God, it's gonna get wild, ladies and gentlemen. All in all though, I thought the WrestleMania match was as good as it could have been, and I enjoyed watching the build up all over again too for this video. I do wish other parts of the story were embellished on a little more, but still, it was good fun. The Backlash video will be available soon. There'll be a few other videos on the channel before I put it together, but thanks for watching this one guys, I hope you enjoyed it, and take care.